Hey guys, what's up? My name is Andrew Narayanan, and this is AP for Teens. This is AP US Government and Politics. Today, we're going to be talking about the Articles of Confederation, the pros and the cons. Now, I've been looking at my previous videos, and I've decided that I am speaking way too blandly. So I'm going to try to make this a little bit spiced up. I'm going to make myself feel a little bit more energetic than the previous videos. So let's get started. In AP US Government and Politics, the first video, which was the last video that we saw, we talked about the Enlightenment period. We also talked... Durin? Really? Really? You're gonna put the Buddha picture up anyway? Alright, fine. Not Buddha's Enlightenment, we talked about the Enlightenment period in Europe during the 1600s. And we discussed four philosophers that really helped develop ideas for the Constitution writers, which were, if you can remember, Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, Charles de Montesquieu, and Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Now that's what happened last time. You're gonna click right over there for that video. The Buddha has said it, you must do it. That's pretty smart of doing, actually. Today we're gonna be discussing something different. We're gonna be discussing what the Articles of Confederation really were, and we're gonna be discussing the pros and cons of it. And despite the fact that that's a small list, it's a big job, and we're gonna have to get started on that quickly. So let's get going. Open the curtains, as we always do, and begin today's lesson. What were they? What were the Articles of Confederation? Well, it turned out to be the first government of the United States, not the one we have today, however. The first government of the United States of America. America. It was technically created, or born, I guess you could say, in 1776, soon after the Declaration of Independence. While it took a couple of years to actually be ratified, the 13 colonies were basically following it already. And it died, I guess you could say, or stopped being in use in 1787 when people found out all the problems with it. As you can see, it had a few pros, but many, many cons, and we're going to be discussing what each of them were. The good things about the Articles. This is going to be a pretty short list, actually. It won the Revolutionary War, but the soldiers won it rather than the actual government. They didn't really do much with it. It created and negotiated the treaty to end the Revolutionary War. Again, see bullet number 1. It doesn't really work out that way. The government didn't do much of that. They helped negotiate the treaty, but I guess that was kind of more George Washington and the army saying, hey, if you don't agree to this, we're not going to relent. A few things that it actually did were the Northwest Ordinance, which was the method for creating new states that we still use today, despite the fact that we probably won't be getting any more states, and federalism, where states and central government shared responsibilities. Federalism is a big topic, and I'm actually going to have a separate video solely on federalism because of how important it is to today's culture and how we work in our US government. But none of that really matters when you see the not-so-good things about the Articles. For one thing, the federal government was extremely weak. It had no military. All the army men were part of the state military. They couldn't tax, which, despite the fact that you're thinking, hey, no taxes, that's a bad thing, because the federal government can't do anything without the money. It couldn't pay any debts, because without any money, they couldn't pay off debts that they took during the Revolutionary War. They could not trade. They could not control trade at all. The states had the ability to choose whatever, if they wanted to trade with anybody in the Africas, any Great Britain, France, Spain, Portugal. They had no Supreme Court at all. All the courts were state courts, and that's the highest you could go. So, theoretically, the New York law could be different than South Carolina's, which could be different than Maryland's, which could be different than Massachusetts, different than Delaware. Had no executive branch at all. There was no president, there was no bureaucracy, and there was nobody really there to, as the Constitution states it, enforce the laws. There was no national currency. There was Delaware money, and there was Maryland money, and there was Massachusetts money, and there was New York money, and really, it took a lot of work just to get things bought and sold. They could rarely amend the Articles. In order to amend them, it had to be unanimous. Every single colony, or at that point, state, had to agree to amend the Articles, which means if one person didn't like it, nobody could like it. And it needed approval from 9 of the 13 states just to pass any old regular legislation. 70%. So all you need is 5 states that didn't like anything, and presto, you wouldn't have legislation to begin with. Couldn't do this, no that, had none of this, blah blah blah. That's eventually what led to the downfall of the Articles of Confederation. Now, how to solve it? How did they fix it and create what we thought today? Well, they thought about amending the articles at first, but then they realized that the articles were so bad that they couldn't actually amend them. So James Madison, who you should recognize in American history, thought about completely rewriting the articles, and the delegates eventually agreed when they realized that the Articles of Confederation had absolutely no worth at that point. They called the Constitutional Convention into conference, which led to a discovery, which we will be discussing next time. Thank you very much for watching this episode of AP Government and Politics. Please do one of the following: subscribe, leave a comment, or like. Follow those arrows, and please do what the arrow is saying. And I hope to see you next time on another episode of AP Government and Politics.